Hello, and welcome back to One Idea Away. I'm Hayden, and today's episode actually came from a conversation with my dad. My dad went to the California Institute of Technology, and at one point, he was telling me about his freshman physics lectures there. Those lectures are kind of legendary in the physics world because they were once taught by one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, Richard Feynman. Now, that might seem like a strange assignment for someone like Feynman. By the time he was teaching at Caltech, he had already done groundbreaking work in quantum electrodynamics, contributed to the Manhattan Project, and would later win the Nobel Prize. Now, you might expect someone working at that level to spend all their time teaching advanced graduate seminars or working with top researchers, but Feynman actually wanted to teach freshman physics. And the reason he gave is really interesting. Freshmen ask new questions. They weren't yet trapped inside the habits of the field. They looked at ideas with fresh eyes. They noticed things that older students or experts sometimes stopped noticing. And Feynman believed that perspective mattered. Because curiosity, the kind that comes from seeing something as if it's new, is the starting point of real understanding. And that idea sits at the center of Feynman's entire way of thinking. If you've ever heard of people talk about Feynman, the word that comes up a lot is genius. And it's true because he made enormous contributions to physics. His work helped shape modern quantum theory, and his diagrams are still used by physicists today to describe interactions between particles. But what made him remarkable wasn't just intelligence, it was curiosity. Feynman approached problems almost like a kid encountering them for the first time. Instead of assuming that complicated ideas needed complicated explanations, he tried to strip them down to their most basic pieces. He wanted to know how things actually worked. And if he didn't understand something, he didn't pretend that he did. That sounds like a simple concept, but it's surprisingly rare. In a lot of environments, especially academic ones, people feel pressured to appear knowledgeable. They avoid asking questions that sound basic, and they protect their image of understanding everything rather than pursuing the reality of their questions. Feynman had no patience for that. If something didn't make sense to him, he'd say so immediately, and then he would start thinking. Now, in my research of him, I found that he has this weird habit of trying to explain difficult concepts in the simplest possible way. Not simplified in the sense of being shallow, but simplified in the sense of being clear. He believed that if you truly understood something, you could explain it in plain language, and if you couldn't, then there were still pieces missing in your understanding. And that idea actually has a name now. It's called the Feynman technique, although he probably never thought about it as a formal method. It works like this. You take an idea, and you try and explain it as if you were teaching it to someone with no background in the subject. When you reach a point where your explanation breaks down, that is where you find the gap in your knowledge. Then you go back, study that part more deeply, and rebuild your explanation. It's a process that forces honesty with yourself because it reveals the difference between recognizing information and actually understanding it. And that difference is massive. When Feynman taught freshman physics at Caltech, he wasn't just delivering information to kids, he was trying to help students experience the process of discovery. Instead of starting with formulas from his Berkeley physics book, he starts with questions. Why does the moon stay in orbit? What is energy really? What does it mean when scientists say something is a law of nature? And from those questions, he would slowly build the structure of physics. Students weren't just memorizing equations, they were seeing how the ideas actually connected. And those lectures eventually became a book series called The Feynman Lectures on Physics, which is still considered one of the most remarkable teaching resources in all of science. But what made the lectures powerful was not just the content, it was the attitude behind them. Feynman wanted students to keep the same curiosity they had on the first day of class, the same curiosity that freshmen brought when they saw those ideas for the first time, because experts lose that. As people spend years inside of a field, they become comfortable with the language and the assumptions. They stop asking certain questions because the answers feel obvious to them. But those obvious assumptions sometimes hide deeper mysteries. Fresh eyes can reveal them again. Another thing that stands out about Feynman is how widely his curiosity ranged. He didn't treat physics as the only interesting thing in the world, as you hear some physicists say. He played the bongos, he learned to draw, he studied art, and he eventually became good enough to sketch portraits. He even developed a fascination with safe cracking while working at Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project. Not because he wanted to steal anything, but because he wanted to understand the mechanisms. For him, curiosity wasn't limited to one discipline. It was a way of moving through life. And That curiosity also shaped how he thought about truth. Feynman believed strongly in intellectual honesty. He warned that the greatest danger in science, and in thinking more broadly, is fooling yourself. He once gave a speech where he talked about something called cargo cult science. The phrase comes from events in the South Pacific after World War II. Some island communities had seen airplanes delivering supplies to military bases, so they built imitation runways and wooden control towers hoping planes would come back. They copied the appearance of the system, but they didn't understand the mechanism behind it. Feynman argued that sometimes research or reasoning can fall into the same trap. People know the outward rituals of science, experiments, data, papers, but without the deeper commitment to honesty and rigor. What they have looks like science, but it isn't actually discovering truth. His warning was simple, but it's very important. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, because to you, you are the easiest person to fool. And that idea applies far beyond physics. It applies to history, it applies to economics, it applies to psychology, really any field where people are trying to understand complex systems. And it even applies to your personal decision making. If we're not careful, we start protecting our beliefs instead of testing them. Feynman's approach was the opposite. He constantly tested his own understanding. He welcomed confusion because confusion meant that there was still something interesting to uncover. And that brings us back to the idea which started this episode: fresh eyes. When Feynman taught freshman physics, he wasn't just passing on knowledge, he was protecting curiosity. Because curiosity is fragile. People try and replace it by routine. People try and replace it by ego. People try and replace it by the desire to look competent instead of the desire to understand. But when curiosity survives, it becomes powerful. It allows experienced people to look at familiar ideas and see something new. And it allows them to question assumptions that others without curiosity take for granted. And that is exactly what leads to discovery. Richard Feynman left behind major contributions to physics, but his deeper legacy might actually be his mindset. Stay curious, stay honest about what you don't know, and keep looking at the world as if you're seeing it for the first time. Because the most important questions are the ones that only fresh eyes notice. Thanks for listening.